The gladiators of ancient Rome are among the most iconic figures associated with the Roman Empire, symbolizing both the grandeur of Roman entertainment and the brutal reality of its social and political systems. Gladiatorial combat was a central feature of Roman culture, and gladiators themselves were often viewed as both heroes and victims, celebrated for their courage and skill in the arena but also subjected to harsh treatment and oppression. The history of gladiators, their rise to fame, and their rebellion, particularly the Third Servile War led by Spartacus, have left a lasting legacy on history and popular culture. Gladiatorial combat originated as part of the funeral games held to honor deceased aristocrats, likely starting in the 3rd century BCE. These early games were intended as displays of bravery and skill, demonstrating both martial prowess and a sense of respect for the dead. Over time, these events grew in popularity and were incorporated into public spectacles in large arenas, such as the Colosseum in Rome. Many gladiators were slaves captured in war or bought from slave markets. These men had no choice but to fight for their lives. Some criminals or prisoners of war were forced to become gladiators as punishment or a form of execution. In some cases, free men, often seeking fame or monetary reward, volunteered to become gladiators. These individuals were known as octorati, and they could earn substantial sums for their participation, though the risk of death was high. Gladiators were trained in specialized schools known as ludi, which were often privately owned or state-run. The most famous of these schools was located in Capua, in southern Italy, where gladiators underwent grueling training to hone their skills with various weapons and combat styles. There were several different types of gladiators, each with their own unique weapons, armor, and fighting styles. Some of the most well-known types include Murmillo, heavily armored gladiators who fought with a large rectangular shield and a short sword; Retiarius, a lighter, more agile gladiator armed with a net and trident, often pitted against the heavily armored Murmillo; Thracian, a gladiator armed with a curved sword and a small round shield, typically facing a heavier opponent; and Secutor, a type of gladiator equipped with a short sword and large shield, often pitted against a Retiarius. Gladiatorial contests became an important part of Roman public life, especially as a form of mass entertainment. These events were typically held in large amphitheaters, such as the Colosseum, and were often sponsored by wealthy politicians or emperors to gain favor with the Roman people. The gladiators fought in one-on-one combat or in groups, sometimes to the death, though in many cases, the defeated gladiator's life could be spared if they surrendered. The crowd and the sponsor often had the power to decide whether the defeated gladiator should live or die, with the iconic gesture of a thumb up or thumb down often being associated with deciding the fate of a gladiator. Besides gladiatorial fights, the Romans enjoyed other types of public spectacles, such as animal hunts, mock naval battles, and executions of criminals or prisoners, often in horrific ways. Life as a gladiator was harsh and dangerous. While some gladiators gained fame and admiration, most were treated as property and faced extreme physical punishment during their training and fights. The gladiators were often branded with a mark or wore distinctive attire, and their living conditions in the training schools were poor. They faced the constant threat of death in the arena. However, successful gladiators could become quite famous, and some even gained followers or fan clubs among the Roman populace. They were often rewarded with money, food, and gifts, and in rare cases, they might earn freedom after a certain number of successful bouts. One of the most famous and enduring figures in the history of gladiators is Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator who led the most significant and famous gladiatorial rebellion in Roman history, known as the Third Servile War. Spartacus was originally a Thracian auxiliary soldier in the Roman army, but after deserting and being captured, he was enslaved and forced to become a gladiator. Around 73 BCE, Spartacus, along with approximately 70 to 200 fellow gladiators, managed to escape from a gladiatorial school in Capua. They initially took refuge on Mount Vesuvius, where they organized themselves into a well-trained and disciplined fighting force.